All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Philipp from DeSci Labs and the DeSci Foundation. I'm also still an active economist at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And I'm going to present some first ideas for a market mechanism that could potentially incentivize scientific progress. So this is the first step, but it's supposed to illustrate where our thoughts are at the moment. So I'm going to do three things. I'm going to first define the problem. Then second, I'm going to talk about the goals and design principles for an incentive layer. And then third, I'm going to show you a toy example of a market mechanism that would distribute rewards to communities that curate and validate research based on how well they do that. So the problem is that the current system has incentives that are, at least to some extent, in conflict with the overarching goal of maximizing scientific progress. So what we're doing at the moment is we're using bibliometric data to measure scientific productivity. So we're looking at things like the number of publications, citations, impact factors of journals. And all of these proxies of productivity are incredibly important, literally for everything that's going on in the scientific ecosystem. So they matter for promotion decisions, hiring decisions, for grants, how much money institutions are getting. And by being such an incredibly forceful coordinating device, they create incentives for scientists to actually maximize for these proxies rather than for the underlying concept that they're supposed to measure, which is scientific progress. And a side effect of that is that it actually leads to a propagation of bad research practices, which contribute to a replication crisis that is spreading across fields and decreasing trustworthiness of the scientific record. So there's some papers out there that literally argue that the current incentive mechanism we have is like a natural selection of bad science. So one way to rephrase that is to say that science, as we're currently practicing it, does not have an invisible hand mechanism through which the self-interest of individuals would necessarily bring about a collectively optimal result. So the intriguing question is whether it is possible to construct such a mechanism. So the good news is that we actually don't have to start at zero. So we already have built a decentralized infrastructure for scientific communications. We have the Codex protocol, we have the DeSci Notes application that is a graphical user interface that lives on top of Codex. And with that, you can share your research without paywalls or publication charges. Anything that you put on there is being stored on an open state peer-to-peer storage network where you have no data silos, you have completely open metadata that everybody can access, and you have data sovereignty. And instead of just having an infrastructure for PDFs, we actually created an infrastructure for rich versionable research objects that can have all the components of research that are relevant, data, code, and so on and so forth. And each of these components of these research objects has a persistent identifier which protects it against link rot and content drift, makes it machine actionable, and enables cool new things like compute over data. And now we also created a system where people or communities can define what we call attestations that basically highlight desirable properties of research objects. And then these properties can be reviewed and validated by communities, by autonomous research communities, as we call them, or ARCs, that basically review, validate, and curate research objects, which then are being shown on the feeds of these of our application. So attestations could literally be anything. So we've already seen like very creative uses of that concept, but they could be things like, open data, open code, big if true, these sorts of things. So the goal that we want to achieve is we want to create a market mechanism that maximizes valuable scientific data on the network. And data here is, of course, broadly defined. And such a mechanism would need to have rewards for all the relevant players in the ecosystem. So this involves authors, but also referees, curation communities, and also the people that are developing and running the infrastructure for all of this. Importantly, we want to disincentivize noise on the network. So we want to disincentivize non-scientific content, fake science, that type of thing. And it's going to be important that we solve the free rider problem of peer review. So in the current system, of course, peer review is not explicitly rewarded in the vast majority of cases. And that, of course, means that it's very hard to find referees. And for a researcher, this means that it typically takes a very long time until you get your reviews back. There's long time until you actually get an actual publication. And very often you end up with low quality reviews from people that are not really experts or that didn't put in a lot of effort. And for the journals, this is also the #1 problem that editors express. So it's really hard to find referees. So we need to do something about that. Obviously, such an incentive mechanism needs to be resistant to strategic behavior and abuse as much as possible. And importantly, with such an incentive layer, we want to create an open playground for mechanism design and for meta-scientific experiments where different communities can experiment with different ways of expressing value and the quality of the science that they're curating and validating. So what we want to do is we want to have a market mechanism that ideally elicits truthful opinions about which of these arcs, these validation and curation communities, actually add the most value to the network with the work that they're doing. And instead of having arbitrary metrics, the idea is that we want to have a market mechanism where the consumers or the users of research can actually decide what they think is valuable. And with consumers here, this is probably not an ideal word, but what I mean is the scientific community and everybody who uses research for one reason or another or is interested in it. And the way that users would express their preferences is by staking tokens into an arc, which then in turn determines the distribution of rewards that these arcs are getting. And then there's going to be this concept of consensus weights, which scale the rewards and protect against untrusted actors. So the basic idea here is that there is a big difference if you're running an arc, if you are the only one who thinks that what you're doing is valuable, or if everybody else in the network actually agrees and also stakes in you. And obviously, communities will have complete autonomy about what they do, their aims and scope, what they do with the rewards that they receive. They can develop different mechanisms for that, how they reward their authors and their referees, what type of attestations they want to see and validate, what type of review mechanisms they implement, full flexibility. So now I'm going to start showing you this toy example of a market mechanism that is inspired by BitTensor. And we're going to make a number of simplifying assumptions here. So first, we're going to just have 3 communities, and they have 3 scientists each. And importantly, we're assuming that there is no overlap of scientists between communities. So that actually helps to make things a lot easier. Then one of these communities is using a token barter economy, where in order to get reviewed, you give tokens, and when you do peer review, you receive tokens, and the other 2 communities do something else. And then each scientist has an initial endowment of 10 tokens. Scientists stake the tokens that they don't need for peer review into ARCs. There is no public trading of the tokens yet. And we assume that demand and supply of peer review are in equilibrium in each community. And there's also no time dynamics yet. So we keep it simple. There's 4 stages to this toy example. The first one is we're onboarding scientists, and they declare what their rules are for the community that they're creating. Then second, we have the peer review process and the redistribution of tokens in this one case. And then third, the participants are going to place their stakes into the ARCs. And fourth, there is going to be the reward mechanism that basically distributes tokens to the communities and to the stakers. Okay, so community 1, 3 people, their community rules are that they want to have 2 referee reports for each paper that they put on their feed. And each of these referee reports costs 1 token. Then these 3 scientists, they're slightly different in terms of like how many publications they want to put out and how many reviews they're willing to do. So then they basically submit their work, they pay the tokens to get their review done. the publications are being matched with referees. They carry out the work, they receive the tokens. And what you see in this particular example here is that A actually consumed more peer review than he was providing. And as a result, he was actually spending some of his tokens. So instead of 10, he now has 8 at the end of the process. And B and C get 1 token extra. Okay. Now, the second community has slightly different rules. So they said that we want to coordinate around 4 attestations that we defined and that we're going to validate. And we're not going to use a direct barter economy for tokens. Instead, we're just going to measure what people are doing, and we're going to drip the rewards to those that were doing the work. So in that case, there's no redistribution of the 10 tokens between the 3 agents. They just publish their work, their attestations are getting reviewed, validated, and that's it. And community number 3 is saying we only want 1 review per paper, and they also don't have a token barter economy. They also don't really have an explicit mechanism to reward the referees. Instead, they just say we're going to take our rewards and we're going to reward the best publication in our arc. So, okay, yes. So then they publish their papers, they do their reviews. There is no change in the distribution of tokens among them. And now we get to the interesting part. So now people are going to start expressing their preferences by staking into these arcs. And overall, we had 9 scientists. They all had 10 tokens. So overall, there's 10 tokens that are getting staked. Just wanted to point out a very obvious pattern here, which is that the 2 arcs on the left, they seem to trust each other. So the agents that are part of arc 1, they're not only staking themselves, but they also stake in arc 2 and vice versa. Whereas the guys here on the right in arc 3, they seem to be isolated. So they seem to believe very strongly in what they're doing, but nobody else actually recognizes them or stakes anything into them. So now the most simple distribution mechanism for rewards in the protocol would be one where we simply distribute rewards among the arcs depending on the total amount of stakes that was being put into them. And just to make it concrete, we're going to introduce 2 additional parameters here. So we're going to say R is the number of tokens that are going to be minted or awarded in this particular cycle. And we're just going to say R is 100. And then we're going to split the rewards between the arcs and the stakers. So the arcs are getting 70%. So that's the parameter alpha here. And the stakers are getting 1 minus alpha, so 30%. So in this most simple case, we see that arc 2, which had the highest total stakes placed into them, they also get the highest rewards. Arc number 1, the lowest stakes, they get the lowest rewards. If we sum it all up, it's 70 tokens overall that we're distributing. So that's 70% of the 100. Now let's look at the rewards that the individual stakers are getting. So this is an example here of agent A. Agent A staked 4 tokens into arc number 1 and 4 tokens into arc number 2. And each individual, so they collect interest from the arcs that they staked in proportional to the relative share of stakes that they have in this arc. So 22 tokens were staked in arc 1 overall. So A gets 4 out of 22 times 1 minus alpha times the rewards for that arc. So overall, A gets staking rewards of 2.67. So if we calculate the interest rate that they're getting for their staking, so they staked 8, they got 2.67 as a return. So that's an ROI of 33%. So let's look at a different agent, agent number G. So G was part of this isolated arc 3, and she took all her 10 tokens and put it into her own arc. She got 3.33 as a return, and this actually happens to be the same return of investment as agent A. So they both got 33%. And it actually turns out that generally in this very naive model, the staking rewards do not depend on which arc you stake in. So that's obviously not very desirable. And also in this case where the third arc was entirely isolated, there is a good chance that, these people were just setting up an arc, not really doing anything meaningful, but just collected, basically staked in themselves to collect these rewards. And this type of collusion attack is obviously something that we want to prevent. So one way to do that is with trust-weighted staking rewards. So the idea is that we could weight stakes by how many other actors in the network trust the community. So the weights, they range from 0 to 1, so 0 to 100%, and we're displaying that here on the y-axis. So these weights, they basically represent how many non-zero stakes an ARC receives from agents that are not affiliated with these ARC. So these trust or consensus signals are on the x-axis. And zero consensus basically means that nobody outside of your ARC is staking anything into you. 100% consensus means that everybody outside of your ARC is staking something in you. And the inflection point of the weighting function is 50%. So building up rewards is harder up to that point, and then it gets easier after all. But the overall amount of rewards will always be weighted by a factor that is smaller or equal than 1. It's never higher than 1. So through such a trust-weighted staking mechanism, trusted ARCs actually become the dominant players in the network over time. So now we can represent the staking behavior of agents and the implied trust signals in our example with these two tables. So the left table just shows who staked in what, and the right table shows how much trust or consensus an ARC has achieved. So in this example, an ARC would achieve 100% trust if all the agents that are not part of it have placed non-zero stakes into it. So we had 9 agents, 3 in each ARC. So that means that the maximum number of non-zero stakes that you could get is 6 for all of these ARCs. And then we just count. So for ARC number 1, 3 agents that are not affiliated with it have staked in it. The same for ARC number 2. So both of them have achieved a consensus of 50%, whereas the third ARC, nobody outside of it staked into it. So their consensus weight is 0. So now we can apply these weights to the reward function. And what we see is 2 things. So first of all, obviously the weighted rewards are much lower overall because we're weighting by a factor that's smaller than 1. But also the distribution of the rewards has changed quite dramatically. So in the unweighted naive case, ARC number 3 got a lot of rewards by just staking on themselves. But when we do consensus weighting, their rewards drop almost to 0. And now we can look at the individual staking rewards. And in the unweighted case, we see that it really doesn't matter who you stake in. So the return of investment is always the same. There's no incentive to think about who you stake in. That's not what we want. In the weighted case, the return on investment is interestingly only a function of how much trust the ARC has that was staked in. It does not depend on the total amount of tokens that were staked into that ARC. So therefore, with consensus weights, it's actually profit maximizing to stake into ARCs that have maximum trust. And vice versa, staking in an untrusted ARC is a bad strategy. So each member of an untrusted ARC would actually be better off by staking into a trusted ARC. And this disincentivizes the formation of ARCs that only stake in themselves to gain these rewards. So doing something like that would create a token that has like 2 very specific utilities. So one is it creates a potential solution to the free rider problem in peer review. And then second, it gives everybody who holds a token a voice in the distribution of rewards in that system, and therefore also an influence on what type of incentives are being created, who is being rewarded, and like what the future of science is going to look like. And with such a system, we would get away from publish or perish incentives. So it really doesn't matter like how much you publish in such a system. There is no arbitrary impact factor. Instead, the mechanism rewards being a trusted and a favored ARC. So the incentives that we're creating here for the ARCs is basically maximize trust in the network and maximize the total amount of stakes that are being put into you. And for the stakers, the objective function is to maximize the investment into trusted ARCs, but then conditional on trust, stakers can express completely freely what their preferences are in terms of like field, mechanics, people, whatever. So I think this is quite a desirable property. So under these simplifying assumptions that we made here, this mechanism is robust to collusion, but it has one obvious problem, which is that achieving consensus will get much, much more difficult if the network grows, right? So if the network is really big and you start a new arc that is potentially really good, you need to have sort of like a bootstrapping or kickstarting mechanism that allows you to gain trust in the network relatively quickly. And one potential solution is here to use arcs that have similar attestations and basically use that as a mechanism to speed up the trust gaining process by using the attestations as a coordination device. So this is just the first step. There's a lot of extensions that need to be done. Obviously, we need to have skin in the game. There's definitely a need for validators in the system and for creating possibilities to slash back actors and so on and so forth. But this is where our thoughts are at the moment. And I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. Yes. Very exciting. That's way better than the So instead of like publishing, right, right. Right. I mean, so honestly, I think with a mechanism like this, it would create the possibility for people to specialize in peer review and actually earn money with it, right? So that's totally fine. But just earning money with peer review is not going to give you a career in traditional science, right? So these incentives are still in play. So if you want to get a job at Harvard, you will still need to publish yourself. So that doesn't go away. Yes. So this is exactly part of the market mechanism here. So if an arc is not doing a good job in terms of validating and surfacing high quality science, chances are that the people that have the tokens are not going to place a lot of trust and not a lot of votes into them. So this is literally, we're opening it up to the market, to the consumers to tell us which of these communities are doing a good job and contributing validated high quality science to the network. John, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Believe me, Christian and I, we've been like in our little hole thinking about this for the entire week. This is a rabbit hole. It goes very deep. Yes. So what type of guardrails do you have in mind? Okay. Right. Yes. Yes. Yep. Exactly. 100%. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly it. Thank you for saying that. I didn't have the time to squeeze that into my talk, but that's exactly how we're thinking about it. Yes. Yeah. So just to add to what Chris was saying right now, so collusion indeed is a big problem. In the simple example that I showed you, it is not a problem. So in this particular toy example is actually robust to collusion. But things will get really difficult when two things happen. First, when we allow that one agent can be part of several arcs, that will complicate matters tremendously. And second, once there is an external mechanism, an external market where people can hold tokens and then stake them who are not affiliated with an arc. So there is these things will complicate matters quite a bit, and we'll need to think about how to handle the collusion and Sybil attack problems that this could potentially create. Yes. All right. Thanks, guys.